Hello, and welcome to the Scaffolding Blended Learning. We're going to be talking about different blended learning and how you need to scaffold your blended learning so that way your students can be successful. This session will help you learn different strategies and tips when it comes to blended learning and using it to help your students be successful in your classroom. My name is Stephanie Howe, and I'm an instructional technology coach in Pickerington Local School District. If you have any questions or need anything, my Twitter handle is down below, and that's the best way to reach me. Just send me a quick DM, and I'm more than happy to help or send any resources that you might need your way. But again, really my passion in education is helping teachers and students be really successful. And one of those ways that I've seen success in their learning is using these different blended learning type of models and styles. So I'm excited to share my knowledge of some of my success and some of my failures with you today. So the first thing that we're going to kind of talk about is the types of blended learning. There's a lot of different types of blended learning, and all of them are probably not on this list. And sometimes I've seen teachers do kind of a mix of these different things together. So this first one is station rotation. If you click these links, it's going to take you over to YouTube. So that way you can see a video about this topic. So here is station rotation. And what that means is students travel to different stations. It's time sensitive. And so every 10 minutes, they rotate to a new station, or every 15 minutes or 12 minutes, depending on how long your class period is. When you're doing station rotation, there's usually a teacher check-in. There's also a digital content area. There's a 4Cs, and then there's an independent practice. So those are the four different types of learning that is happening throughout the class period. Some teachers start their lesson with a mini lesson. That's whole group going over expectations, going over maybe a quick lesson about what's happening and what's going on. And so again, if you need more resources, there is an additional video there for you. The next thing is the playlist model. So with the playlist model, you'll be able to kind of see that students will travel through like a checklist type of model. So they've got an activity 1, then they do activity 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there's this can-do list. Okay, again, additional videos if you need them. And then what students will do is they travel at these different activities at their own pace. So some students might move a little bit quicker, and some students might move a little bit slower, and that's totally okay. Again, it's self-paced, and it's more of that check off kind of thing where students are looking at their activities and they're going from activity to activity to meet that lesson goal. And this, the teacher is often checking in with students. So throughout the lesson, the teacher is able to check in with those students. If a student finishes this lesson and masters it through that teacher check, they then can complete these can-do activities. So maybe they'll find the air, maybe they'll learn a how-to video, or maybe they will continue and create like a paper slide. There's some choice here as well. So students could pick and choose which can-do activity they do. However, in the playlist model, typically, every single student has to do every single one of those activities. So in this example, there's 5 activities. Every single student would have to do those 5 activities to show that they have mastered the learning goal. And again, that teacher is as a check-in. The next one is a must-do, can-do list. And so with a must-do, can-do list, these can be kind of great for students as well. What students do is they have something that they have to do. That's the must-do. And then they have maybe like a then do or a can do. And this is where they have to do that after everything that they have to get done. That happens next. This could be kind of the extension. This could be spiral review, a couple different options here. And then the like may do, or sometimes it's called aspire to do. You can have like those extensions, those problems for students. So this is kind of going over how to create one of those boards. If you're interested, again, there are resources for you in these videos. Roadmaps. Roadmaps are one of my favorite ways to help students be successful in their learning. So when it comes to roadmaps, students have a kind of learning goal that they're working towards. So for example, in this overview, students are learning about writing an email. And the goal of that is to be able to write an email at the end. Okay, so you're taking that whole unit and then you're scaffolding it. You're picking different points of where you want the students to be. And so, for example, they're going to watch an overview video. Then they're going to complete another activity. Then they're going to have a teacher's check, and then they're going to do something else, and so on and so on and so on. And so with the roadmap model, students are able to really dig deep into their learning and learn more about what they're supposed to be doing. So again, can just be a great model for students to really dive into the skill, especially if it is like multi-steps, because sometimes those multi-steps can be really difficult for students. And so doing this roadmap type of style can really help break down those strategies for students so that they understand them and they're bite-sized for them to take. This last one is called the grid method. This grid method is from Teach Better Teams. And you can kind of, again, see another video example if you wanted to. And this is created by different like levels. So here's level 1, for example. Students complete all of these activities in order, and then the last level right here, or the last activity in this level, students have to have a teacher check, and they have to do like a mastery check as well. So students will complete that mastery check. If they pass, they get to move on to level 2. If they don't pass, they might have a reteach with the teacher. They could also, in this time, go back and review any materials. So sometimes students say they watched the video, but they really didn't. So you can look at that mastery check and you're able to say, okay, go back and rewatch the video, try these other practice questions, and let's try again. And so again, students are trying to get to that mastery stage, and you're able to look at their student work and give them feedback that's kind of personalized to that student. And again, once the students complete level 1, then they would move on to the different levels. So again, great activities for students, and it goes along with depth of knowledge. So DOK level 1 is that basic recall, where then students go on to level 2, where they're working on more of that like strategic kind of thinking. Level 3, they're doing like a compare and contrast, and then they keep on growing on their learning, and they're able to extend their knowledge. So this is a great model if you have students that are different levels. So again, these are just a few different types of blended learning, a quick overview. And again, if you're interested in learning more, just click these links and there's a video to help you explore that model a little bit more, because everybody's teaching style is a little bit different. And so when it comes to blended learning, you've got to figure out what one's going to flow best in your classroom. And so once you figure that out, you are ready to go and you're ready to soar. However, there are just a couple different things that we're going to talk about here when it comes to scaffolding with students. Because if you're a teacher and you've been teaching for 8 years, and let's say for 5 of those years you've done it with blended learning, you might like the roadmap type of style of your classroom. However, your students every single year in August are brand new to you. So you've got to scaffold to them to help them understand your models, your routines. And if you don't, it's going to be chaos and it's going to be a mess. So again, that is really huge to focus on when you are working with students, and to remember that in August, they need to be taught what is expected from them. And so we're going to kind of really quickly go over station rotation just real quick again. And then we're going to kind of look at these different scaffolds on how to help your students be successful in the classroom. So again, the basics, there's 4 stations. There's that teacher station, digital content, 4 C's, and that independent practice. Some of the executive functioning skills that your students will have available to them is that timer. You are able to use that timer. You might also give them verbal teacher check-ins. You might also kind of remind the students, hey, it's time to move on, or what do you do? In the executive functioning spots, where I've seen some issues is when there's downtime. So sometimes in that independent practice, I see teachers not give enough work, or the students don't know what to do. And so that can cause some executive functioning issues. And so I would be prepared, and maybe you want to use one of these other models, like a playlist of like a checklist. Hey, when you're at this station, this is what you have to do. Or a must do can do list. Hey, you have to do this first, and then you can do this. So you want to kind of work that in as well. And I've seen teachers mix and match these different models to create their own style when it comes to blended learning. The environment, students again are moving around the room, they're getting up, which is really good because oftentimes we sit a lot throughout the day. And so students are able to get up, they move around to their next station, and then they begin to work on that activity at that station. And then finally, with this, you want to kind of think about different procedures that you need to prepare for your students if you are going to use the station rotation model. The first one is students finish work before the timer's up. What are you going to do? That timer finishes and they had 15 minutes to work, but the kids finish that activity in 5 minutes. What are they going to do for the other 10 minutes? Because if you don't have a plan, that's when misbehavior is going to happen. So you want to develop some procedures in place for what happens when that does happen. Another thing that you want to kind of keep in mind is these SEL check-ins. Oftentimes in station rotation, there is a teacher station. And so some days, again, every day might look a little bit different, but some days you might not want to have that teacher station. Maybe that teacher station is you in a video giving instruction to your students. Maybe it's peer feedback where they're talking with another student and they're kind of learning from each other. They're having those conversations or discussions about what they're reading, or they're looking over each other's math work. So then that allows you to check in with your students who are having some SEL needs that day. The next model is the playlist, must do, can do, grid, method, roadmaps. Okay, all of these kind of go together. So we've got all of these different models, and I kind of put them together because they're very, very similar. They might just have a different name or a different flow to it, but the idea behind them is very, very similar. So the basics. When it comes to these, students are completing these activities at their own pace. Typically, they're in order. Sometimes, again, once you get your blended learning set up, and if you've been doing it for a while, you might feel comfortable to give your students a pretest. And with that pretest, some students might be able to start at a level 2, or some students might be able to start at this activity rather than at the beginning at vocab because they've mastered the vocab. They don't need to learn it, they already know it. So again, students are able to move at their own pace, which can kind of create maybe a crazy classroom if you're not ready for everyone to be at their own pace. But there are some tips to help you manage it, so don't be too freaked out. Some of the executive functioning skills that come with this type of model is time management. Students have to have time management to be really successful at this area. And if they don't, you need to teach them strategies in order to manage their time better. Some of the things that I've done with my students is we've estimated time. We talk about, okay, let's look at this task. How long do you think this is going to take you? And then we could set a timer, and then they try to beat the time. So again, it's just knowing your students and knowing which executive functioning skills they really, really struggle with can be a benefit to help them with blended learning. And if you're interested, feel free to DM me on Twitter. I have a video that goes over executive functioning, and students take a test, and it tells me where they weakness when it comes to executive functioning. And wherever their weakness is, I am then able to take that information and begin to develop those skills to help them be successful. And there's like a whole information page about all of the different levels that the students need and different strategies to help them based on their executive functioning skills. So if they're struggling with organization, teaching them how to be organized and going over those different things. If their thing is goal setting and they need goals, there's resources for you as well. So if you need that resource, feel free to email me and we can chat more about that. I've got to-do lists. So along with the playlist, must do, their grid method, the roadmaps, there are a to-do list for the students. You have to do these activities. The directions are pretty clear for the students. Also, some of them use trackers. So that way you know where students are in their progress of their learning. So that way, if you're using maybe the grid method, students can have a spreadsheet and they can change their color pretty quickly to let you know where they're at. So if we go back to this slide on this one, this grid method one, if you go right here, you can see this is a spreadsheet and I'm able to track my students and they're able to tell me, okay, they're on this lesson, they've mastered it, they're finished with it, they need check, they need helped. I can use this spreadsheet to help me understand where my students are at. Okay. But you might use a Google slide version where students use Pear Deck and they quickly show you where they're at, or a Scrum board and students master that. Or you might use this roadmap type of model and students can use their icon, so like this Jeep, to track where they're at in their learning. This makes it so that they're able to ask and understand questions about what they don't understand and where they're at in their learning. I no longer, when I introduce this roadmap type of model to my students, I no longer have, I don't get it. I finally had questions of, I don't understand this part. I don't understand how to change the denominators. It was no longer, I don't understand it. Well, what don't you get? I don't know. It's no longer those conversations. I'm finally able to have deeper conversations with my students because their learning is exactly laid out for them in these formats. They have their tracker to know, hey, I don't get this skill. I don't get this box. And this is what the box says I should understand. It's like quick targets for my students. The environment in this type of classroom is students are, again, working at their own pace. So I've seen some teachers use flexible seating where students are kind of sitting in different positions. Maybe they're standing desk, maybe they're sitting on the floor, maybe they've got bean bags. I've seen that kind of environment. I've seen where kids are sitting at their desk, allowing students to choose. I've seen a teacher that does a weekly seating chart or even a daily check. So based on their exit tickets, she'll place students based on where they're at in the lesson. So again, using that information and knowing what you prefer as your own teacher, you can kind of set that up for yourself. And then just think about it. What happens if a student finishes quickly? Do you have like a can do or an expire do or a project or maybe a genius type of hour project for students to work on? What are you going to do when that's going to happen? Because it's going to happen eventually. Okay, so thinking ahead of your students is a really good thing when it comes to blended learning. Also, what are you going to do if a student needs help on a task and you're meeting with a small group of students? Because in this type of model, you should be pulling students to help them on different concepts. I might give different exit tickets or mastery checks throughout this model or these models. And when I'm doing that, I'm able to pull students and go over any misconceptions that they have. However, if I don't have that student right away, how are they going to let me know they need help? Maybe you do like a 3 before meet where they check Google, they ask a friend, and then maybe they have to rewatch the video directions, okay? Or you have a Google form that they fill out and they wait in like a classroom queue type of model where, hey, I need help. They pull a number and you pull those numbers up to meet with them in between your groups, okay? So you got to think about what am I going to do when these two things happen? And what are my expectations for my students when this does happen in my classroom? So, a couple things that I like to tell teachers is when you're first starting blended learning, start with station rotation. When you're starting in August and you've been doing blended learning for 7+ years, start with station rotation. There's two kind of pros here, okay? The first pro, and again, it might just be 2 weeks. It might not be a whole long time, but you just kind of want to get your students in a flow of how your classroom is going to run. Because if you don't, there can be some issues later with behavior management. So the first pro is students learn those expectations, okay? They learn what is it expected to do during these type of lessons. Also, when I first start off with station rotation, I might not be pulling a group. I want to be checking in with students, going over any questions that they have so that they understand my classroom procedures. And then I can start pulling them and it can be a lot better and a lot smoother when we get to that point. Pro number 2 is you're able to meet with students in small groups. You're also able to walk around the room to ensure that they're understanding those different learning tasks. So again, that's kind of why I suggest starting with station rotation, just to build those expectations, to help any questions, and to show the students that you're present and you're able to help them when they do get stuck, and just to build your classroom culture. So this can be a great kind of idea to start when you're using blended learning. So here's an example. This is off of Slides Mania. And you can kind of see here, there's group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4, station 1, 2, 3, 4. Students are in different groups. How you group your students could be flexible. You could use data and you could group them by ability. So lots of different ideas that you can do with your students when you're trying to group them into different groups. Once you have your groups down, the students will then travel to these different stations, okay? I've seen a lot of different teachers do a lot of different things when it comes to station rotation. The first thing is with station rotation, students might start off one day, they do one station a day. Okay, that's totally fine. If you're ready, if you want to try that, great for you. So I've also seen teachers where everybody does group 1 on this day just to learn what it looks like when we're doing independent practice. What do we do? What does it look like? What do we do if we finish early? Then we go on and we're going to go over what we do during the 4C's activity, how we put our material away, where our materials at, because those stations can be a little bit more creativity and a little bit more critical thinking. Then in the digital content, how do you log into programs? How do we get those in? Again, I've seen teachers do this whole group to help scaffold to their students. So you might do that whole group for a week or a couple of days just to get your students in the routine. Then the following week, what you might do is you might have your students actually have a timer and they're going through these different stations. Okay. Again, you might not be pulling groups, or you might be, depending on your group of students and your readiness for that. But maybe on Monday, I don't pull a group, but then on Tuesday, I start pulling groups. On Wednesday, I stop. And then Thursday, I start pulling groups again. Again, you want to go over those behavior management strategies with your students so they know exactly what is expected from Monday to Friday. Okay. Scaffolding the roadmap. So again, a roadmap is really a great strategy, and I'm just going to use a roadmap for this example. However, playlist, everything that we went over before is very similar to the roadmap style. Again, I highly suggest starting with the station rotation model just so students understand the procedures, they know where to get material, they know your procedures in place, and they have you available to ask any questions that they might have. Once you get going, the roadmap is a great model. So, one of the pros of the roadmap is it prepares students for success. They have the end goal in mind, and there are many steps in between to help them get to that end goal. So, students might, for example, have a starting point, and it might be a video overview. Then, in the next one, they might have a practice and then a teacher check. They're able to get teacher feedback throughout the roadmap. And again, it's self paced, so you're able to check in with students throughout that roadmap. And pro number two is you're able to build those relationships with your students. So, um, being able to get them to have some ownership of their learning is another pro as well. So, having those relationships and having that student ownership, I can conference with my students, just like pro number three, and I can build their ownership as well. So, we can set goals. Hey, on this mastery check, I want you to try to get 3 out of 4. Here are the action steps that you're going to do in order to get there. Hey, I see that you need to work on this, okay? Creating that ownership, giving students pre-tests and having them try to aim for a higher score and starting to build that ownership can help you when you're doing roadmaps for your students. Maybe even creating like a goal for the day. Another idea is these teacher check-ins, okay? So having those teacher check-ins built in, or you can randomly pull students up, or you can kind of look over exit tickets or mastery checks and pull your students up that way. I also love this roadmap model because, for example, after recess was a really hard time for my students. Usually at recess, there was some type of issue that happened and it was not resolved by the time they came to class. And so what would happen is I would have students that were ready to learn, but 5 of my students weren't ready to learn. And so the rest of the class had to wait while I was in the hall dealing with these 5 other students. And those 5 other students rotated, I feel like, almost every single week. But I was doing a disservice to my students who were ready to learn after recess. And because of that, I learned that this roadmap model really helped because it has video directions embedded from me. My students can watch me on YouTube and they're able to learn right away. So after recess, my students could use the roadmap. It was self-paced. They were able to watch videos. They were able to complete independent practice. They were able to work on different projects. And then if they needed teacher feedback, they could work on a can-do activity or move on until I was ready to meet with them, depending on the lesson and the activity. And I was able to meet with my students and deal with their SEL needs. I was able to say, hey, I understand, and I was able to work with them to help them. The relationships and the management in my classroom became a lot easier with this roadmap model because I had time built in to work with my students and to really get to know my students at a personal level. Also, for an example, I had a student who fell asleep one day. And so I just went over and he told me that he went to bed really late. And because of that, he didn't get as much done on his roadmap, but it was okay because then the following night he did get the sleep that he needed and he was able to kind of catch up with his peers. So again, it's self-paced. Students are able to have a bad day and it's okay. And I can catch them up or I can work with them one-on-one if I needed to or in a small group. So again, roadmap model has a lot of different pros, but I would really use that station rotation model to help build that roadmap before getting started. So here is an example of a roadmap. Okay, so you can see here, this is kind of scaffold one. This is like if I'm first introducing this to my students. I try to color code so they kind of can see all the different colors kind of match. So anytime there's a video, it's red. Anytime it's like independent work, it might be blue. Anytime there's a teacher check-in, it's white. This little person, if my students were to click on it, would take them to the Google form where they can ask me a question. They can also click that little person and they are able to get assistance if they need to use the restroom. That's how they communicate with me. And I can just say, yes, you can go to the restroom. Hey, I need to go meet with you. Come on up. So using that little person has really helped in my classroom, but every classroom is different. So you got to figure out what's going to work in your classroom. So again, right here, this has a timer. So for that executive functioning skills, my students are to do iReady for 15 minutes. They click the timer, they get into iReady, and they begin to work on that lesson. Then they watch a video. So they have a video instruction that is from me. They watch it, and then they learn the directions for this independent read. They know exactly what they're supposed to do and the question that they're looking for when they're looking for evidence in their reading. After they do this activity, they then check in with me. I look over their work and I can say, go rewatch the video because you didn't watch it. Or I can tell them, hey, you're good, move on to the next lesson. Or hey, this needs some work, go back to your seat and fix it. So I'm able to give my students personalized, targeted feedback based on what they showed me. And it's real time, it's conferencing with the students in front of me. After that, they do another iReady, and there's another 15 minutes. I then have a data check with those students, and I can say, okay, you should have 30 minutes. How are we doing on our time? Is there anything that you're struggling with, anything you need help with? And I can then work with my students on those additional skills as they're working on iReady. Then there's another video instruction and another independent practice, and the students are then creating a book in Book Creator. I then can check their book in Book Creator, and if they're good, again, they can move on. If not, I give them targeted feedback and they're able to make those corrections right away. Then again, they watch a video and they complete story works online, and then they complete their iReady reading path. Then I have a teacher check again. I'm able to say, hey, how's it going? Let's check over this. Let's look over your iReady. You should be done for the week. If they're not, they have to redo that step. And then again, a video, they go over this activity. And then at the end, there's some type of activity. Okay, so again, I'm building on a skill. Sometimes there's different activities that they might be working on. Other times, I'm really focusing in on one skill. So maybe I'm focusing on multiplication or multiplication of fractions or adding fractions or long division. Okay, I'm able to break down those skills so that way my students have success. Again, Scaffold 1 has a lot more teacher checks, a lot more videos that my students might need to be successful in these tasks because they might be new tasks to them. Scaffold number 2 is a little bit smaller because I take out a lot of those teacher checks. My students might not need as many teacher checks, which allows me to get up and move around the room to support my students. Or I can pull small groups of students to really dig in and teach them whatever concepts they might need to personalize their instruction. So again, they've got their iReady, they've got their timer, they've got their independent reading, and again, they've done this. So they know the routine. They don't need another video to watch it. They know exactly what I expect because I've used the same material a little bit again and again and again. And there are times where I add new stuff, but sometimes I'll just add one video rather than multiple videos on a roadmap. And then scaffold number 3 is I might allow my students to choose the order that they want to do task. Okay, so I've laid it out here on 1 and 2 for my students. You have to do these in order. But on these tasks, my students might be able to go in and drag these boxes to where they want to complete these different tasks to create their own learning roadmap. Okay, this allows them some choice and some control over their learning. Sometimes I give them extra boxes so they don't have to pick all of the different boxes. They can pick where they want their teacher check-ins at and where they want them located. And then I can kind of work with the student to help them. And again, this is a great executive functioning skill for my students because they're learning how to prioritize different tasks and they're learning that what they need to do in what order. Okay, so again, a little bit of choice, but also they are beginning to learn what they need to do in what order to be successful for their learning. Scaffold 4, I take away those boxes and then they can create their own roadmap. Here's the starting point, here's that finish goal, and then the students are able to work and they're able to create their own roadmap to how they want to demonstrate their knowledge. Okay, so ownership. Students are going to want to set goals. Okay, when we want students to become owners of their learning, they need to set goals and they need to track them. Some different ways that I've used to track them is student portfolios with Google Sites. I've also used a spreadsheet for younger students where they put it in and then it charts this goal for them so they can kind of see how they're doing. Also, setting like class goals. Okay, so one of my favorite activities to do with this is the Fast and Curious Edu protocol. And what students do is on Monday, they take a vocab test using Kahoot and they get a 20% on Monday. You don't pre teach any of this, okay? On Tuesday, they do it again. Their score goes up a 30%. On Wednesday, you play Kahoot again. It goes up to 40%. I have the students take the words that they missed and they do a FRAIR model activity to learn those words. After Wednesday, they come in and Thursday, their score is about a 70. And then on Friday, we're at 100%. Students, again, they can see their progress and they can see their growth throughout the week. That is really important for ownership when we are teaching students to be owners of their learning. Another thing is, what do I wonder? So students write down any questions that they have. We want them to know, hey, when I don't understand something, this is what I need to do. And I need to take ownership that I don't understand this material. I want my students to be able to come to me when they don't understand and be able to ask me different questions that are very concise to what they don't understand so I can help and support them. Another thing is reflections. So having students think about what have I learned and allowing them these different choices can allow them to have some of that ownership in the classroom. You might also add some this or that boards or choice boards in the classroom as well. So this or that gives students two choices to choose from rather than a 9 squared choice board, which can be really overwhelming for a lot of students. Where a choice board might be 3 different options or 4 different options. I would not give students 9 options because then they go into like choice overload. So again, keeping it short and sweet can be really helpful. Another thing is students have to reflect. They need to think about what have I learned and have I mastered it? So having students look over a rubric and making sure that they have mastered the material. So here are some pro tips when you are using that blended learning model. First thing is teacher. You could have a station where students come to you to check in, or you could be moving around the room. It depends again on the activity that you're doing. Some days I wanted my students to come to me so we could meet as a small group and have a discussion. Other days, I needed to be up, moving around the room, answering their questions, checking in with my students, dealing with any SEL activities that I needed to deal with, and really just looking over my students. And so moving around the room was the way that I needed to go. Okay. I would try both of these and figure out kind of, okay, for this activity, I need to be here. For this activity, I should be up and moving, helping my students. It could also look different. Maybe at the beginning, you pull a group, but then throughout, you're meeting one-on-one with students at their own desk. Mini lessons. Mini lessons can be really helpful. These can be quick 10-minute mini lessons at the start of class where students have learned and they go over your expectations for the day. If you have a new activity, this is a great place to introduce where they get the material, what's expected, and they can really start to think about what do I need to do to be successful in this learning environment. Then there's the independent lesson. It needs to be structured. If you're using a roadmap here or a must-do, can-do list, you want to have some type of activity for students to do. I like to use like checklists for them to quickly check off what they have done. Also, those SEL check-ins with the playlist model, you're able to have more of those type of check-ins. You're able to move around the room, you're able to check in with students, and you're able to conference with students as needed. Okay, where sometimes in that station rotation model, you're stuck with those students for 15 minutes, and there could be a meltdown in the corner of your room, and you're unable to help that student because you're with another group of students. So sometimes the playlist model is more flexible for that. Also, targeted feedback. In these different models, you are able to tell students exactly how they did on the assessment. You're able to go over, hey, you struggled with finding the denominators. Let's work on that part. instead of, hey, good job. Okay. You're able to really dig deeper into their learning and help them look at what they're doing and then use your feedback to help them understand what they're missing. And so, if you want to learn more, there is a podcast starting very soon, and you will want to subscribe on Apple or Google Podcasts or Anchor. And it's going to be called Control the Chaos. You can follow us on Twitter as well. And with Control the Chaos, we're going to be talking about different classroom management tips and tricks to help you be successful, along with like blended learning and a bunch of other instructional strategies. So make sure you follow us on Twitter and subscribe to the podcast. And we cannot wait to join you on this journey. It's me, myself, and Tara Ruckman, who will be joining me on this podcast. So again, we cannot wait to connect. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me on Twitter. I'm going to put my handle up one more time, and I would love to connect. So again, if you need any assistance or just want to check in, feel free to send me a DM on Twitter, and I would love to connect with you. And I look forward to hearing your failures and success stories when it comes to blended learning.